The world shattered around Youssef al-Karem in an instant. The celebratory music of his wedding night replaced by a deafening roar and the searing embrace of a fiery inferno. Beirut glittered around him, a city draped in the finery of celebration. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and the promise of a long, balmy Mediterranean night, thrummed with a frenetic energy. Crystal chandeliers cascaded light onto a dance floor packed with guests, their laughter and animated conversations weaving through the upbeat Arabic melodies. The clinking of champagne flutes and the rustle of silk gowns painted a picture of unadulterated joy. Youssef, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo, moved through the throng with the effortless grace of a man accustomed to attention. His dark eyes, usually shadowed by a brooding intensity, danced with a rare, open happiness. Tonight, he was Youssef, the celebrated intellectual, the respected academic, the man who had finally found love and a semblance of peace. He paused, a glass of fine champagne held aloft, and offered a toast to his bride, Nadia. She, a vision in a gown of shimmering white, met his gaze with a radiant smile. Her laughter, like wind chimes, drifted towards him, a melody that erased the lines of worry etched upon his face in recent weeks. Beside him, his closest friend, Samir, clapped him on the back. Samir had been with him through everything, the academic debates, the political skirmishes, the endless loneliness. "You deserve this, my friend," Samir had said earlier, his voice thick with emotion. Youssef had simply smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He drifted through the crowd, accepting congratulations, exchanging pleasantries, savoring the feeling of belonging. The wedding was a spectacle, the culmination of months of meticulous planning. Every detail, from the imported flowers to the selection of the orchestra, had been orchestrated to perfection. It was a testament to his status, his connections, his ability to navigate the complex social landscape of Beirut. Outside, the night was a warm embrace. The city lights twinkled like scattered jewels against the inky canvas of the sky. Security, discreet but omnipresent, moved through the party. Men in dark suits and tight smiles observed the gathering with practiced vigilance, their presence a silent assurance of safety. The air, even now, carried the faintest hint of danger, a subtle reminder of the tensions that simmered beneath the surface of the city. But tonight, Youssef had allowed himself to ignore it. He allowed himself to revel in the moment, to believe that he had finally outrun the shadows of his past. Yet, even in this haven of celebration, a different kind of gathering was quietly unfolding. A woman, her face a mask of polite smiles and casual conversation, watched Youssef with eyes that held no joy, only a laser focus. She stood near the bar, her elegant dress a stark contrast to the sharp determination that gleamed in her eyes. Around her, people danced, laughed, and celebrated life, unaware that their world, their joy, would soon be irrevocably shattered, consumed by fire, and the terrible echo of a past that refused to stay buried. The world outside the pristine white wedding tent was a symphony of chaos. A car bomb had just ripped through the heart of Beirut, eliminating the very figure the city had been celebrating moments before. Youssef al-Karem, however, was not the groom. He was a shadow, a phantom architect of violence who had masterminded the Munich massacre, an atrocity that had cast a pall over the 1972 Olympics and ignited Israel's relentless hunt. The irony was bitter. His meticulous planning had led him here, to the epicenter of his own demise. Though no one at the wedding knew the truth, Youssef al-Karem, or rather Rashid al-Hamed as he was known by his enemies, was a man woven from the threads of Palestinian defiance. Born into the wreckage of 1940s Palestine, he had seen his father fall in battle and grown up in refugee camps, absorbing the narrative of victimhood and resistance. He was a striking man, tall, with captivating dark eyes that both intrigued and intimidated. He moved through the camps with an air of destiny, gathering followers not through ideology, but by the sheer force of his presence. While other young men joined militant groups out of desperation, Rashid approached resistance as a vocation, an inherited legacy from his fallen father. He joined Fatah in the early 1960s, quickly distinguishing himself through his operational planning. Unlike others who favored reckless acts of violence, he understood that terror needed strategy. Random attacks, he knew, were useless without clearly articulated and methodically pursued political goals. By his mid-20s, he was one of Arafat's most trusted operatives, a man who could be sent on missions across the Middle East and Europe with minimal oversight. His judgment was sound, his execution flawless. He cultivated relationships with intelligence services in Egypt, Syria, and Libya, learning the trade from professionals who recognized his potential. These networks would later become the infrastructure for Black September's most sophisticated operations. Black September emerged in 1971, a radical splinter group born out of the Jordanian Civil War. It was a label for Fatah operatives undertaking operations that the PLO couldn't publicly claim without losing diplomatic support. Rashid al-Hamid became its operational head, transforming rage into strategy, coordinating attacks that killed dozens and terrified hundreds more. The Munich massacre, however, was the act that cemented his notoriety. He wasn't present in Munich. He was too valuable to risk on the ground, directing operations from a safe distance. But his fingerprints were all over the planning. He selected the target, recruited the operatives, arranged the logistics, and provided the funding. The Mossad, in the aftermath of Munich, saw him as its primary target. Golda Meir authorized a campaign of targeted assassinations, codenamed Wrath of God. Rashid, at the top of the list, proved elusive. He was always moving, using multiple aliases and forged passports, varying his routines and avoiding patterns that surveillance teams could anticipate. He understood operational security because he had studied the methods of Israeli intelligence and knew how the Mossad operated. This made him a ghost, a phantom, the man behind the shadow that haunted the lives of his pursuers. The muted thud of the car bomb's detonation still echoed in Eitan Levy's mind, a phantom tremor that rattled the foundations of his waking hours and haunted his sleep. He saw the flash, felt the shockwave, even though he hadn't been there. He was back in Tel Aviv, chained to a desk, yet the carnage in Beirut was forever etched into his soul. For 6 years, the name Rashid al-Hamid had been a constant, a specter that lingered in the shadows of intercepted communications, whispered intelligence briefings, and the cold, hard reality of an unfinished mission. Now, with al-Hamid dead, it should have been a triumph, a clean closure. But the weight of what was lost, the innocent lives caught in the crossfire, left a metallic taste in Eitan's mouth that no amount of strong coffee could wash away. He stared out the window of his cramped office, the familiar cityscape of Tel Aviv blurring in the humid afternoon haze. The vibrant chaos of the streets, usually a source of comfort, felt distant, almost mocking. He could almost smell the salty air, the pungent diesel fumes, the ever-present aroma of grilled shawarma wafting up from the market stalls below. His gaze drifted downwards, settling on the azure expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The water seemed impossibly calm, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions churning within him. He lit a cigarette, the first of many he would smoke that day, inhaling the nicotine deep into his lungs. The smoke, a familiar shroud of temporary oblivion, offered little solace. Eitan had been the point man on the Lilehammer operation, the disastrous attempt to eliminate al-Hamid years ago. He remembered the briefings, the meticulous planning, the agonizingly precise details that were supposed to guarantee success. He remembered the exhilaration, the anticipation, the almost clinical detachment needed to carry out such an operation. Then, the horrific aftermath. The wrong man dead, an innocent bystander gunned down in front of his pregnant wife. The international scandal, the arrests, the humiliating forced retreat. The mission, a spectacular failure, had not only cost innocent lives, but also exposed the Mossad's long arm and stained its reputation. The world had seen their shadow, their ruthlessness, and the price of their mistakes. He felt the sting of failure constantly, a burn that refused to heal. The photograph of Ahmed Bouchiki, the innocent waiter, smiled back at him from the file on his desk. The man's face, so similar to al-Hamid's, was a constant reminder of the terrible cost of miscalculation. The thought of Bouchiki's widow and the child who would never know their father weighed heavily on Eitan's conscience. He'd lived with that guilt for years, the constant reminder of his failure in the echoing silence of his apartment. Now, al-Hamid was dead, but the victory felt hollow. He'd been transferred from field operations, relegated to a desk job, the price of his earlier failures. He was a shadow of his former self, a ghost haunting the corridors of the Mossad. He traced the outline of the photograph with his finger, the faded ink, a testament to the lives lost and the promises broken. He had finally gotten his retribution. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd paid far too high a price. The scent of burnt tobacco, the phantom tremor, the weight of the sea and the sky and the lives of those he could not save, all swirled within him. The mission was over, the file closed. But for Eitan Levy, the echoes of the explosion would continue to reverberate, a constant reminder of the shadows he would forever be bound to. The champagne glass shattered in Youssef Al-Karem's hand, the shards mirroring the explosion that ripped through the Beirut night, an event that had, in the span of a heartbeat, erased his world. Days after the echoes of the blast had faded, in the sterile quiet of a Tel Aviv office, Eitan Levy sat hunched over a desk, littered with photographs and reports. The air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and impending doom, matched the mood settling upon him. The file before him detailed the latest intelligence on the elusive Youssef, the man he'd pursued relentlessly for years. The man had been a ghost, a phantom existing in the shadowy fringes of global terrorism. Youssef, the architect of the Munich massacre, the man responsible for the deaths of so many innocent, had vanished after the attack, evading capture, remaining a constant thorn in the side of Israeli intelligence. Levy, his resolve hardened by the memory of a failed mission, the ghost of innocent blood on his hands, had sworn to find him and bring him to justice, a promise that had morphed into a personal obsession. A recent intelligence report, delivered with the urgency of a summons, detailed a wedding planned in Beirut. The bride, a former beauty queen whose celebrity status would bring with her a coterie of journalists and socialites, making the event a highly public affair. The groom, the same Youssef Al-Karem, the ghost, the phantom, the target they'd pursued across borders and continents. A cold certainty settled in Levy's gut. This wasn't just a wedding. It was an invitation, a fatal opportunity. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, a chance to strike at the heart of their enemy, where the shadows of vengeance and justice intertwined. He ran his hand over the glossy photograph of Youssef, a handsome, distinguished man, smiling amidst a sea of well-wishers. The carefully curated facade, the veneer of respectability, grated against the monstrous actions of the man beneath. He knew the risks. Beirut, even in its relative calm, was a volatile city, a melting pot of factions and allegiances. Any operation would require meticulous planning and flawless execution. But the potential reward, the elimination of a man who had orchestrated unspeakable acts, was too enticing to ignore. He envisioned the precise details, from the type of explosives used to the escape routes that would ensure that they vanish without trace, so their enemies would only have the blood to remember them by. Levy leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting towards the window. The city hummed with activity, indifferent to the quiet storm brewing within him. He had faced failure before, tasted the bitter sting of defeat, but this time, he vowed, would be different. This time, the ghost would be laid to rest. This time, justice, however cold and calculated, would be served. He picked up the phone, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Get me Salma Darwish," he instructed the operator. "Tell her we have an assignment." The hunt had begun, and the world had no idea the deadly game about to unfold. The explosion shattered the opulent facade of Beirut's wedding celebrations, but Salma Darwish was already miles away, blending into the city's labyrinthine streets as if she were a chameleon. Her mission complete, and her heart a cold, efficient instrument. Salma, a ghost in the vibrant tapestry of Beirut, was the key that unlocked the intricate clockwork of the operation. Her mission, to become a shadow, to walk unseen, to breathe the air around Youssef Al-Karem, and identify the kill zone. Her cover story was meticulous. A researcher, ostensibly documenting the cultural nuances of pre-war Beirut. She rented a small, unassuming apartment in the Verdun district, a stone's throw from the wedding venue, and, more importantly, Youssef's known residences. From her balcony, she could almost taste the celebratory champagne and hear the faint echoes of the music. A stark contrast to the grim purpose that occupied her waking hours. The city, a paradoxical blend of beauty and simmering tensions, was her backdrop. Youssef, her target, the central actor in a play of shadows. Salma's days began before dawn, fueled by strong black coffee and an unyielding focus. She would observe Youssef's movements, the rhythm of his life, the habits that would eventually betray him. She visited cafes he frequented, sat at tables where he'd laughed, and walked the same streets, feeling the phantom presence of her target. It was a tedious, repetitive process. Yet she found a perverse satisfaction in the routine, the meticulous charting of another person's vulnerability. She knew the city intimately, the hidden alleyways, the bustling markets, the subtle shifts in the political landscape. She spoke fluent Arabic, her accent lost in the myriad dialects of the city. She learned to read the unspoken language of the streets, the glances, the whispers, the guarded conversations that revealed the truth about Beirut's soul, a truth she was obligated to exploit. She developed a keen sense of observation, a skill honed over years of clandestine operations. One evening, after days of patient surveillance, Salma saw it, the perfect opportunity. Youssef, leaving a late-night meeting, took a familiar route. The car, a black Mercedes, turned onto a narrow street in Verdun. Then, at a specific intersection, the traffic slowed. The street narrowed, creating a perfect bottleneck. It was there, at that very spot, that the car crawled through the deserted street, where her mission would conclude. The vulnerability was not in the flamboyant wedding itself, nor the highly secured building, but in the mundane, predictable rhythm of a man's life. A cold certainty settled within her. The operation was now a matter of timing, of precision, of executing a plan so meticulously crafted that it left no trace. The ghosts of Munich were about to be laid to rest. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. She was the silent observer, the architect of a death, and the vessel through which the long arm of the Mossad would finally reach. The champagne, the laughter, the romance, the entire celebration became, for her, just another stage set for the inevitable brutal finale. She would become a ghost in a city that itself was haunted, and she, in turn, would do the haunting. The air itself tasted of impending doom as Salma, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest, watched Youssef Al-Karem's car disappear around the corner. Knowing his death was now just a matter of moments. Each day she'd tracked his movements, a shadow clinging to a shadow, and each day a sense of mounting dread had settled over her, the price of her trade. She was a hunter, and he, the prey. Yet their proximity was a form of intimacy, an awareness of the other, though he remained blissfully ignorant. Her days were a meticulously crafted dance of observation and infiltration. Dressed as a chic, affluent woman frequenting Beirut's cafes and boutiques, she'd charmed her way into the social circles surrounding Youssef, gathering information under the guise of casual conversation. She'd listened to his eloquent pronouncements on literature and politics, his easy laughter, all while noting the precise contours of his life. His daily routine was a clockwork mechanism, each cog perfectly aligned. He woke late, breakfasting at a favorite cafe overlooking the Mediterranean, then to his modest office, followed by regular meetings with associates, and always, at dusk, a journey back to his flat in Verdun. The key to the lock, she discovered, lay in the predictability of his evening commute. Every night, without fail, he took the same route home. A slow, deliberate passage through the bustling streets. She'd shadowed him countless times, her own rented Fiat blending into the chaotic tapestry of traffic. She'd noted the checkpoints, the potential hazards, the fleeting moments where his security detail lowered their guard. Now, as dusk bled into night, the streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows, the scent of exhaust fumes mixing with the lingering fragrance of jasmine from nearby gardens. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken promise of violence. Salma sat in a nondescript apartment overlooking the intersection of Rue Sursock and Rue Gouraud, a prime location for her daily observations, its balcony offering a panoramic view of the area. Each evening she had trained her eyes on the road below. She imagined the bomb hidden below, awaiting the right moment, and her stomach would churn with a mixture of anticipation and revulsion. She focused, fighting the rising panic. She ran through the checklist, the target, the car, the route, the time, all were in place. She imagined Youssef, now likely at his evening meeting, oblivious to the metal serpent waiting to unleash its venom. The thought made her both sick and oddly detached. This was the work, the job, and she was the instrument. Her fingers tightened on the binoculars, the lenses blurring the already hazy streetscape. She saw the familiar vehicles of his security detail, black sedans with tinted windows, snaking through the traffic. Her breath hitched in her throat as the first vehicle, A dark Mercedes turned the corner, followed by his own car, a sleek silver Mercedes, and then the final security vehicle bringing up the rear. She could see Youssef in the back seat, leaning back with a newspaper in his hand. A casual observer, unconcerned, unaware. The lead car cleared the intersection. Then she saw his car approach. She took a deep breath. She waited. The screech of tires, a flash of orange, and then silence. The explosion at the intersection revealed a weakness that promised the end of Youssef Al-Karem. The revelation, a seemingly mundane detail unearthed through weeks of observation, held the key to unlocking the operation. Salma, leaning against a weathered stone balcony, the humid Beirut air heavy on her skin, reviewed her notes. The late-night route, the predictable habits, all pointed towards a successful outcome. Yet, it was this single, specific piece of information that truly brought the mission into focus. The intersection of Rue des Martyrs and Avenue Fouad Chehab was unremarkable. Just another crossroads in a city fractured by conflict. But Salma, studying satellite imagery, tracing the route Youssef's driver habitually took, had found something significant. After weeks of driving past the intersection, she found a detail that made her heartbeat quicken and her senses sharpen. The street narrowed there. Buildings crowded in on both sides, casting long shadows even at midday. The traffic slowed to a crawl. Streetlights, flickering and unreliable, cast a weak yellow glow. It was, quite simply, a perfect kill zone. The image solidified in her mind. Youssef's black Mercedes, gliding through the evening, the familiar convoy of guards trailing behind. They would approach the intersection, the usual caution relaxed by the late hour and the perceived safety of a routine. They'd slow, perhaps stop for a beat at the red light, and that's when it would happen. A detonation, a blinding flash, a deafening roar. In the confined space, the force of the explosion would be magnified, delivering maximum impact. The close proximity of the buildings meant there would be little opportunity for escape. She imagined the faces of the Mossad operatives in Tel Aviv, studying the photos of the intersection, the satellite images, and the meticulously gathered intelligence. They'd see it too. They'd recognize the opportunity, the potential for a clean and decisive operation. The weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. Her mission was to observe, to gather data, to ensure that the plan, once conceived, would be executed flawlessly. The decision to proceed, to unleash the violence, would not be hers. That role belonged to Eitan Levy and the team back in Tel Aviv. But she was the one who had unearthed this critical detail. She was the one who had brought them to this point. A shiver ran down her spine, a combination of the cool night air and the unsettling realization of the impending violence. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images that had begun to play in her mind. The smell of exhaust fumes, the distant sounds of car horns, and the murmurs of the city drifted up to the balcony. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her mission required her to be detached, to see Youssef as a target, not a man. But she couldn't help but acknowledge the complexity of the situation. This was more than just a mission. It was the culmination of years of planning and the embodiment of a deadly dance of cat and mouse. Salma knew that the intersection had become the fulcrum of the entire operation, the place where everything would come to a head. The location, the route, the predictable routine, the bomb, the execution, it was all coming together in this one moment. She felt the knot of anticipation in her stomach, the familiar tension that came with the knowledge that she was on the precipice of something momentous. In that moment, she understood the terrible power held within the unremarkable intersection. It was a pathway to justice, a trap set in the heart of Beirut. The city held its breath as the plan, months in the making, finally reached its deadly crescendo. A thunderous explosion ripped through the heart of Beirut, shattering the perceived safety of a wedding night and instantly ending Youssef Al-Karem's life. In the clandestine headquarters in Tel Aviv, the Mossad's top brass huddled around the table. The faces were a mosaic of grim determination, each etched with the gravity of the mission at hand. Eitan Levy, his eyes reflecting the cold steel of his resolve, laid out the final plan. He knew this was the moment of reckoning, the culmination of years spent chasing a ghost, a shadow. The meticulous planning, the intelligence gathering, the careful cultivation of assets, It all hinged on this one: precise, lethal execution. The air in the room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the palpable tension of controlled anticipation. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Eliminate Youssef Al-Karem, the architect of the Munich massacre. The target was to be taken out through a meticulously orchestrated car bomb, designed for maximum efficiency and minimal collateral damage. Every detail had been scrutinized, every contingency considered. The location was a specific intersection in the Verdun district of Beirut, a place where Al-Karem's convoy routinely slowed down, making him a vulnerable target. The weapon, a sophisticated explosive device hidden within a seemingly innocuous vehicle parked along his anticipated route. The trigger, a remote detonator, controlled by a Mossad operative stationed nearby, who would watch for the exact moment to strike. Eitan knew that any miscalculation, any deviation from the plan, could result in disaster, not only jeopardizing the mission, but also potentially causing unacceptable civilian casualties, a disaster they had desperately wanted to avoid at all cost. "The objective is clear," Eitan said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Neutralize Al-Karem. Precision is paramount. We need to be surgical. Any deviation from the plan is unacceptable." He gestured to the detailed diagrams and maps spread across the table. Each road, each building, each potential vantage point had been carefully analyzed. The team had studied Al-Karem's habits, mapped his movements, and identified the best opportunity to strike. The car bomb, constructed in Israel with the utmost care, was ready to deploy. It was concealed within a Volkswagen Beetle, and the car had been parked inconspicuously along the assassination route. The choice of vehicle was deliberate. It was intended to blend seamlessly into the chaotic tapestry of Beirut's streets. "We have confirmation that Al-Karem will be leaving the wedding reception at approximately 3:30 p.m. this afternoon," Eitan continued. "His convoy will be traveling along the designated route. Our operative will have visual confirmation and be prepared to detonate the device when Al-Karem's vehicle reaches the kill zone." The faces around the table were stoic. They were professionals, trained to carry out difficult and dangerous tasks. They understood the stakes, they understood the risks, and they accepted them as part of their duty. Each operative understood that their mission was not just about eliminating a terrorist. It was about upholding the honor of their nation, about avenging the innocent lives lost at Munich. It was a somber responsibility, one they carried with them every hour of every day. "Are there any questions?" Eitan asked, his gaze sweeping across the room. Silence. There were no questions, only a shared understanding of the task ahead. Eitan nodded. "Then let us proceed. May God be with us." The Beetle, once gleaming and new, now sat unassuming at the intersection of Rue de France and a smaller unnamed lane, its paint dulled, its tires slightly deflated. It was a metal cocoon of death, a parked car that held within its chassis the meticulously crafted instrument of Youssef Al-Karem's demise. Inside, the bomb sat nestled amidst the car's aged components. A precisely engineered mix of C4 plastic explosives, shaped and wired by Mossad's most skilled bomb makers, were packed around ball bearings designed to act as lethal shrapnel. The detonation system was equally intricate: a remote receiver, powered by a long-life battery, awaiting the signal that would transform this innocuous vehicle into a fiery inferno. All that was needed was the precise moment, the perfect alignment of Youssef's unsuspecting vehicle with this instrument of destruction. Weeks of meticulous planning had culminated in this moment. The car itself, a faded shade of blue, had been purchased through a series of shell companies and false documentation. Its registration was clean, its history untraceable. It was the perfect disguise, a ghost car, designed to blend into the chaotic landscape of Beirut, a city where car bombs were, sadly, not uncommon. The interior was Spartan, the seats worn, the radio silent. No lingering scents, no personal touches. It was a pure instrument, devoid of sentiment or personality. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the buildings in hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with the scent of exhaust fumes, the distant calls of street vendors, and the ever-present hum of a city perpetually on edge. The street was relatively quiet at this hour, a lull before the evening rush. The operatives responsible for the final preparations worked with a practiced efficiency that belied the stakes. They checked the wiring, confirming the connection to the receiver. ensuring the antennae was optimally placed. They tested the remote detonator one last time, a silent click that echoed in the empty car, a promise of impending doom. As they finalized the arrangements, the weight of the mission settled upon them. They were not merely executing a target. They were participants in a dance with fate, a high-stakes play where the consequences were measured in human lives and political repercussions. The thought of Layla Mansour, Youssef's bride, added a layer of unease. They knew she would be in the car, an unintended victim, but the mission demanded their resolve. They had been reminded of their orders: cause as little collateral damage as possible, but ensure Youssef's complete elimination. The lead operative stepped back, giving a final, critical once-over of the car. He looked at the street, assessing the sightlines, gauging the potential for accidental witnesses. All was prepared. The only thing left to do was to wait, and to trust in the precision of their planning. With a final nod, he closed the car door, leaving the Beetle to its silent vigil, a harbinger of death, awaiting the arrival of its target, and the explosion that would echo through the streets of Beirut. The champagne flutes shattered the moment Youssef's car entered the kill zone, the explosion a deafening punctuation mark to a life steeped in shadows. The wedding reception, a lavish affair that had echoed with laughter and music just hours ago, now dissolved into a memory for those who lived to remember it. Youssef, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders as he finally stepped away from the joyous crowd, settled back into the plush leather of the Chevrolet, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. His bride, the radiant Sarah, beside him, her hand resting warmly on his, whispered something about the beauty of the day. He chuckled, squeezing her hand in return. The drive out of the hotel was smooth. The driver, a trusted member of his security detail, navigated the throng of well-wishers and the celebratory atmosphere of the city with practiced ease. The convoy, a silver bullet cutting through the glittering tapestry of Beirut, moved with the calm assurance of a familiar routine. Youssef, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, felt at peace. He had built an empire from the ashes of his past, a life of respectability carefully constructed on the foundations of violence. Tonight, it all seemed worthwhile. The years of planning, the sleepless nights, the constant fear, all melted away in the afterglow of his triumph. As the convoy turned onto a smaller street, the traffic thinned. The city lights cast long shadows, dancing over the sleek vehicles. A street vendor, oblivious to the drama about to unfold, trundled his cart of sweets along the sidewalk. Children, their energy unspent, chased each other, their laughter echoing in the evening air. The air itself held the sweet fragrance of jasmine, mingling with the exhaust fumes. The night, warm and inviting, promised the dawn of a new life. Youssef leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle rocking of the car lull him. He thought of his parents, of his fallen comrades. He knew that tonight they would look down upon him, beaming with pride at the life he had built, at the love he had found. He imagined the years to come, filled with joy, prosperity, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Suddenly, a violent tremor ripped through the car, a blinding flash of orange filling his vision. The world exploded. The sound, a monstrous roar, was swallowed by the shockwave that slammed against his chest, stealing his breath. The Chevrolet was thrown into the air, twisting and turning, metal screaming against metal. The windows imploded, raining shards of glass. A fiery inferno engulfed the vehicle, the heat searing his skin. He felt a sharp, searing pain, followed by a numbing darkness. Sarah's scream, cut short, echoed in his ears. The world contracted, then vanished. All that remained was the darkness, the deafening silence, and the chilling finality of the moment. The wedding, the reception, his future. All were extinguished in a single, devastating heartbeat. He was a shadow once more. But this time, it was a shadow that could never return. The world shattered into a blinding flash of orange, then a deafening roar that ripped through the quiet Verdun night, turning the anticipated jubilation into a scene of utter devastation. Salma Darwish, perched in the safe house overlooking the intersection, held her breath, the acrid smell of burnt metal and cordite already seeping through the cracked window panes. Below, The festive lights of Beirut seemed to pulse with an unnatural, furious energy. The air itself vibrated, thick with the echoes of the explosion and the screams that were now beginning to pierce the initial shock. She forced herself to breathe, forcing down the surge of adrenaline that clawed at her throat. This was it. The moment she and so many others had planned for, waited for, and prepared for, had finally arrived. She wiped the sweat from her palms, the dampness clinging to the expensive fabric of her dress. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the chaos unfolding below. She'd spent weeks here, months even, observing, waiting, becoming almost a part of the city's pulse. She'd learned the nuances of Beirut's light and shadow, the rhythm of its streets, the habits of its people. She'd tasted the pastries, listened to the music, and breathed in the heavy scent of jasmine that clung to the evening air. Now, all that was gone, replaced by a maelstrom of destruction, the product of meticulous planning, cold calculations, and a singular, deadly purpose. Salma's eyes, trained to dissect every detail, scanned the scene. The sleek black Mercedes, Youssef Al-Karam's pride, now a mangled, fiery carcass, its once pristine form twisted beyond recognition. Debris, like deadly confetti, rained down, a testament to the bomb's devastating force. The second car in the convoy, the one carrying his security detail, was also heavily damaged. And then there were the bodies. She couldn't make out details, just silhouettes, some moving, others still. Her gaze drifted to the point of origin, the innocuous Volkswagen Beetle that had blended so seamlessly into the city's tapestry. Now, it was a molten ruin, a monument to the precision and deadly artistry of the Mossad. She had not witnessed the trigger being pulled, but she knew the agent was in position, ready to deliver the final blow. The precision was breathtaking, almost clinical. Every detail, down to the timing of the detonation, had been considered, calculated, and rehearsed. The weight of the operation settled upon her shoulders, a crushing burden of responsibility. The explosion had been more violent than anticipated. Even from this distance, she could feel the earth tremble beneath her feet. Now, all that remained was the aftermath. The chaos, the investigations, the questions, and the inevitable, unsettling weight of knowing that she had been an integral part of this destruction. She forced herself to focus, shutting out the immediate horror of the scene. The immediate focus was on her escape. She had a role to play after the bomb's detonation. She needed to vanish, to become another ghost in the already overcrowded city of Beirut. The sirens began their mournful wail, a sound that would soon echo through the shattered streets, each note a reminder of the price of the mission's success. She quickly gathered her things, her movements precise and practiced, born of months of training. Her gaze swept one last time across the carnage, then she quietly slipped out of the safe house, disappearing into the chaotic night. The world dissolved into a crimson inferno, the elegant Chevrolet he was riding in obliterated in a heartbeat. The last vestiges of the wedding celebration evaporated, replaced by the deafening roar of the explosion. Eitan, in Tel Aviv, held his breath, his hand still hovering over the remote detonator switch. The echoes of the blast a phantom vibration against his palm, the finality of the act searing itself into his soul. Beirut at twilight was a study in contrasts. The soft glow of streetlights, the distant murmur of traffic, the scent of jasmine mingling with the sharp tang of exhaust fumes. But tonight, a new aroma had been added to the mix. The acrid stench of burning metal and flesh. The carefully orchestrated plan, months in the making, now culminated in a violent crescendo, a brutal punctuation mark at the end of a life lived in the shadows. From his vantage point in the safe house, the operative, positioned with the precision of a surgeon, confirmed the target's convoy approaching the kill zone. The signal was given, a simple nod, and the world irrevocably changed. The explosion ripped through the serene evening, a monstrous bloom of orange and black that swallowed the intersection whole. The Volkswagen Beetle, the unassuming vessel of death, was instantly vaporized, its metal twisted into grotesque sculptures. The Chevrolet carrying Youssef and his bride Layla was lifted from the ground, slammed against the buildings that bordered the narrow street, and then collapsed in on itself. Debris rained down like a deadly confetti, shards of glass, fragments of metal, and the unspeakable remnants of a life. The air filled with screams, the panicked cries of the wounded, and the sirens that would soon become the soundtrack of the night. In the aftermath, a disorienting haze settled over the area, a mixture of smoke, dust, and the lingering scent of cordite. The operative, his face a mask of detachment, swiftly gathered his equipment, his movements precise and practiced. There was no time for contemplation, no room for emotion. The mission was complete, the objective neutralized. He melted back into the labyrinthine alleys, a ghost disappearing into the familiar shadows of the city. In Tel Aviv, Eitan allowed himself a single, deep breath. The weight of years, the burden of his past failures, seemed to lift, replaced by a strange, unsettling sense of completion. He had avenged the fallen, settled a score that had haunted him for far too long. He had, in a twisted sense, brought closure. But within that closure lay a profound emptiness. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the victory was hollow. The war against terror was a relentless beast, and he had only managed to slay a single, albeit formidable creature. Others, just as dangerous, would rise to take its place. The silence of his apartment in Tel Aviv became oppressive, broken only by the incessant tick of the clock. He visualized the scene in Beirut, the carnage, the shock, the grief. He thought of Layla, a woman whose life had been tragically intertwined with the darkness. He thought of Youssef, a man whose choices had condemned him to a violent end. He picked up the phone, and with steady hands, he dialed the number that would signal the next phase of the operation, the meticulous cover-up, the erasure of all evidence, the return to anonymity. The hunt had ended. But for Eitan, the shadows, the moral compromises, and the ghosts would never truly disappear. He closed his eyes, and the echo of the explosion, the finality of the act, lingered, a constant, unwelcome companion. The world exploded in a symphony of violence, the elegant Beirut night shredded by the raw, visceral scream of the car bomb, a sudden and brutal conclusion to Youssef Al-Karem's wedding celebration. The Chevrolet, once a gleaming symbol of joy and new beginnings, was torn apart, hurled sideways, a twisted metal coffin spewing fire and debris into the already darkening sky. A second later, the Chevrolet collapsed onto the street, its roof caved in. The street, moments before filled with the low hum of wedding chatter and the promise of a long night, became a hellscape of chaos, shock, and the acrid smell of burning gasoline and flesh. The blast shattered windows across the Verdun neighborhood, a shockwave rippling outwards, setting off car alarms and silencing the distant strains of music from the hotel. Within seconds, stunned wedding guests, drawn by the deafening roar, stumbled out into the street. The air, thick with dust and the stench of explosives, was alive with screams and the panicked cries of the injured. Bodies lay scattered across the pavement, illuminated by the flickering flames consuming the wreckage. Among them, a man lay still, his body obscured by the wreckage and the dust clouds that were still forming. Chaos reigned. The Lebanese security forces, alerted by the blast, swarmed the area, sirens wailing in the sudden silence. They moved with a practiced efficiency, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the scene for threats, for survivors. The sight before them was a testament to the brutal realities of a city perpetually teetering on the edge of unrest, where politics and violence often intertwined. Wedding guests, still in their formal attire, pushed past security, searching desperately for loved ones, their faces etched with horror. A palpable sense of disbelief filled the air. A celebration had been transformed into a disaster zone in a matter of moments. The whispers began almost immediately. Was it a car bomb? Was it a targeted attack? The initial confusion soon gave way to grim certainty. Palestinian militants, already converging on the scene, spoke in hushed tones. The name Youssef exchanged between them, the implication clear. The whispers grew to a roar. The architect of Munich was dead. The Mossad had finally gotten their man. They had waited for this for so long, and it was hard to hide the satisfaction from their faces as they began to survey the scene. From their apartment across the street, Salma watched, a cold wave washing over her. The precise moment of detonation had been a blur of fiery light and deafening sound. Now, she was left with the aftermath. A ravaged street, the acrid smell of death, and the knowledge that she had played a part in this orchestrated execution. In her mind, she replayed the hours leading up to this point, the tedious surveillance, the meticulous planning, and the mounting tension that peaked with the order to detonate. Then it was over. Now, a new chapter had begun. A dark chapter. Back in Tel Aviv, Eitan received the confirmation with a grim satisfaction. He wasn't surprised. He knew this moment would come. And yet, the reality of the operation's success, the finality of it, still left him with a chilling emptiness. The target was eliminated. The mission was complete. But he was well aware that this was not a victory. This was the end of a very bloody chapter, but not the end of the book. As he would find out, this was just the beginning. The gears of revenge and war never stopped turning. The shriek of tearing metal and the earth-shattering boom that claimed Yusef al-Karem's life echoed across the Mediterranean night, a brutal punctuation mark on a life steeped in violence and deception. In Tel Aviv, Eitan Levy closed the file, the cold, stark reality of the mission finally settling over him like a shroud. The metallic tang of the explosion, the acrid smell of burning rubber and gasoline, the screams. These were all distant phantoms now, replaced by the sterile quiet of the Mossad office. The photograph, grainy and indistinct, of Yusef's shattered vehicle, a twisted monument to a calculated act of revenge, stared back at him. It was a victory, undeniably. Justice, maybe. But the taste in Eitan's mouth was far from sweet. He had seen the file from the Munich attack. He had studied the operational plans and the faces of the people murdered. Now the man who commanded the attack was also dead. It was a victory that had come at a terrible price. He thought of Salma, the agent who had risked her life on the ground. She was already back in Tel Aviv, her debriefing complete. Her face, he recalled, was a mask of professional detachment, but he'd seen the flicker of something else in her eyes, a ghost of the tragedy she had witnessed. He hoped she was all right. He knew she had to live with it forever. He reached for the final document, a summary of the operation, the meticulous planning, the careful execution, the precise timing, all of it now distilled into bullet points and coded language. There was the confirmation of Yusef's death, the analysis of the collateral damage, the inevitable conclusion: mission accomplished. But within the cold, clinical language, the human cost was buried. The innocent lives touched by the blast, the shattered wedding, the grief that would consume the survivors. He thought of the new wife, a woman who had, by cruelest luck, become entangled in his world. Her death, unlike Yusef's, had served no strategic purpose. It was the unintended consequence, the collateral damage that hung over the operation, a reminder of the moral compromises inherent in the work they did. Eitan sighed, pushing the file away. The silence of the office pressed in on him. Outside, the city of Tel Aviv bustled with life, oblivious to the clandestine world that operated just beneath its surface. The same world that took lives, and brought death to those who seemed untouchable. The details of the operation would remain classified, locked away in secure vaults, its existence denied by those who knew its secrets. The operatives involved would fade back into the shadows, their identities forever shielded by the veil of secrecy. There would be no medals, no public recognition. Only the quiet satisfaction of a job done, a debt repaid. He stood up, walking to the window. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a million tiny stars mirroring the constellations above. He stared out, the weight of the mission settled on his shoulders. He had carried out the most challenging mission of his life and had fulfilled his duty. The world would not know the price. The world would go on. But for Eitan, the echo of the explosion, the specter of a bride forever silenced, would remain. The end of one mission meant the beginning of another. The hunt never truly ended. He walked back to his desk and placed his hand on the final file. There was no real closure, just the cold, hard certainty that the darkness would continue.